We got Cleveland Browns coming into Washington to play the 3-1 Commanders, coming off of their big win in Arizona. We've got Spencer German from the Believe podcast called The Dog Check here on Ref the District. Let's go. All right, let's bring in Spencer German. Spencer German from the Believe podcast called The Dog Check. I want to make sure I get all of that right. Spencer, we're going to put you in the hot seat here. We appreciate you coming on here and talking to us here on Ref the District.
Absolutely, guys. I appreciate you inviting me on. I'm excited about it and looking forward to. Well, I hope we get a good game on Sunday. We'll have to see.
Well, we got a lot of questions because we've just been talking for the last about 15 minutes, kind of talking all about what we see on paper. Of course, we're not inside on what's going on there in Cleveland, but we've got a lot of questions. I think my first question, my biggest question is, how is it that you have a team that was a playoff team, a double-digit win team, with an offensive-minded head coach, and who's won Coach of the Year before? How is it this team has won one game this year, and their quarterback, Deshaun Watson, hasn't thrown for 200 yards in a game this year, despite the fact that they've had the third most attempts in the league this year? What the heck is going on with this offense in Cleveland?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny you asked that because I do think Browns fans are sort of shell-shocked, thinking a lot of the same things. This is a team that obviously has high expectations given how last year went, and they did that last year. They accomplished that last year with 5 different quarterbacks, including, I'm sure as you guys are well aware, like Joe Flacco coming in at the end of the season and leading them to the playoffs and the whole special moment that was. And so you come in this year and you're supposed to now have stability at the quarterback position. Deshaun Watson's finally healthy. The offense is built around him, and it just hasn't gone. It just hasn't gone the way that that people thought it would. So it is a great question. I think there's a number of factors in play here. I think first of all, the offensive line has been awful this year. And that's honestly like the first thing I point out with this offense. I know people want to point it to Sean, but I actually think the offensive line has been the biggest problem for this offense so far to this point in the season. I don't know if it's just that they aged really quickly and they're just not as good as they once were, or if it's the effects of losing arguably the greatest offensive line coach in the game in Bill Callahan this offseason, and you bring in Andy Dickerson, who, listen, I think all due respect to Andy Dickerson, I know he's highly regarded around the league as well, but obviously he's not Bill Callahan. And so I don't know if that change has kind of impacted things. It doesn't help that there's been a lot of injuries up front again this year, but I think the problems really start there. They haven't been able to generate much of a push. The run game hasn't been able to get going in certain instances because of that. I also think they've abandoned the run kind of early because of that. And I think some of that revolves around the offense is built around Deshaun anyway. But I think that's problem number one. And then I do think I think Deshaun is part of this. Like it would be silly of me not to at least point out the fact that he's had his fair share of struggles and missteps and maybe hasn't performed to the level that he's expected to. I do think this past weekend, if you have a chance to go back and watch any of the game tape from the Raiders game, I don't put that loss on him. I think from start to finish, he actually played probably one of his best 2 games from first quarter to fourth quarter in a Browns uniform last week. And if that touchdown to Amari Cooper, that was like 82 yards and it got called back on a holding, I'm sure you guys saw the clip of that. If that doesn't get called back, he throws for 250 yards, 2 touchdowns. If Amari doesn't have a ball deflect off his chest that he drops, he doesn't have an interception thrown in there. And it's funny, like the 200-yard thing is something that Browns fans point to a lot too. That's like the biggest complaint they have is that he doesn't throw for 200 yards. So I actually think he's coming off of a really good game, which maybe sets the tone for him to replicate that here against Washington. We'll see. But there are still some shortcomings that have sort of reared their ugly head in the previous 3 weeks that still tell you like he's not quite back to being the guy that he was in Houston. I think this past weekend was the first time we saw any sort of semblance of that in a while. I know that was a very long-winded answer, but
no, that's great.
No, you're good. Amari Cooper keeps coming up in trade rumors either now or at the deadline. What's going on with that? Why is he a target to be traded?
Yeah, so this all kind of stems from in the offseason, the Browns had an opportunity to extend Amari. He's going into the last year of his deal, didn't have a lot of money guaranteed, and he was seeking an extension. Obviously, as all these other big name receivers were getting paid, he was kind of like, hey, I want one more payday too, as I'm about to turn 30. He turned 30 in June. So it stems from that, and I kind of was of the belief that they'd get something ironed out. They'd find some sort of maybe short-term extension, like 3 years maybe, and it'd be water under the bridge. But then this thing lingered a little bit longer. He didn't show up to veteran mini camp and skipped that portion of the team's kind of off-season program. And then on the eve, I think it was, of training camp, there was this report that they finally kind of ironed some things out. And all they did was guarantee all his money for this year. So they gave him guarantees for this year, but nothing beyond 2024. And so I think it started there where you kind of felt like Amari was maybe slighted a little bit by the organization. And then at the end of training camp, his name popped up in trade rumors, as you allude to, with Brandon Ayuk, when the 49ers are still sort of figuring some things out with him. And I think that's maybe, I don't want to say the nail in the coffin, because he's still here and he's still, I think, trying to play at a high level. But I do think like almost like two strikes, right? Like, they tell you one time, we're not going to extend you, and then they say, hey, we're floating your name out in trade rumors. I can understand from a human level why you maybe feel like you're a little slighted here. And so I think that because they didn't commit to him long term, there's this kind of this belief that they're not necessarily going to extend in this offseason and keep him around. And if the right trade package were to kind of materialize, maybe they'd pursue something. And I think part of this too has to do with just his play to this point. He's been brutal. He leads the league in drops. He has 8 of them this year. One of them was that one this past week against the Raiders that deflected off of his hands and was an interception. And just a bad play. So like there's some problems there. And I think that's kind of it's on both fronts. I think part of it is Amari's a little bit, Amari's always the kind of player who's going to show up and work hard. But I do think not getting that commitment from the Browns, he's a little bit like half in, half out. And then I think on top of that, the Browns were kind of preparing themselves for life without Amari Cooper already. So I think all that is like this has created this perfect storm of, hey, if the right package comes along, maybe we will trade Amari Cooper.
So let's kind of go back a little bit to Deshaun here just for a second.
Yeah.
And his play, which, as you said, he seems to be getting a little bit better, at least this last game. Is there any sort of concern that with Jameis back there as his backup, that there's a chance that they just kind of move on, say, okay, we just can't do this anymore. Let's see what Jameis can see if he can salvage the season for us.
If you ask the fans that, the answer is 100% yes, because
everybody loves the backup quarterback.
I mean, there's fans, and especially in Cleveland, where it's been just a rotating cast of backups since the team came back in '99. Right. Anytime they drafted a quarterback, that was the guy they wanted to see. So 2 weeks ago, the fan base was probably ready for Jameis Winston, quite honestly. But from an organization standpoint, like, I just think they've because of the contract, they've dug their feet in the sand on this one. Like, I don't know that there's an easy way out. I actually was kind of surprised that I guess not surprised, because it is the way they do business. Like, they love to kick the can down the road with these contracts and just move money. So it's in voided years and all this different stuff. And they did that with Deshaun again this year, right before the season started. And I guess the reason I said I was kind of surprised was because I actually thought this would be the year they'd eat, like, it would have been his cap, it would have been like $63 million for this year. And I thought they were just going to eat it so that they could get some of that money off the books and create at least a little more flexibility in the last 2 years of this deal. But then they renegotiated it, and now you're sort of tied to, I want to say there's upwards of like 90 plus, there might be over $100 million still committed to him over the last 2 years, just because of the voided years that they created. And so they're kind of in a hole. Like, I just, until the last year of this deal, where maybe you could do like a Russell Wilson, just, move on and bite the bullet. Yeah. I think they're sort of just stuck with him. So they'll continue to preach that they're riding it out and that they believe in Deshaun. And I mean, I guess if he played so poor late in the season that you really had to make a change, they would. But I don't think that. I think we're a long, long way away from that, because they've shown and sort of with their actions proven that they're super committed to Deshaun at this point.
That's a lot.
It's crazy.
That's a huge headache. That's a huge headache. I know, Spencer, it's only been 4 games, but do the Cleveland Browns have an identity yet? Or are they still trying to figure that out?
I'm going to say no. I think that's honestly the big question that this team still faces going into week 4 of the season. And I think it is alarming that they haven't sort of figured that out to this point, particularly on offense. Defense, well, and their defense has some issues too. Like last week, the Raiders were the ranked last in the league in terms of total rushing yards. They had 153 yards on the season coming into that game, and they had 152 yards in the game against the Browns. So they basically doubled their yards on the ground in one game against Cleveland. So they're having some issues stopping the run. But at any moment, like Jim Schwartz's group can kind of come alive and start making better plays. A lot of it was missed tackles. Guys just got to make the plays. But you still sort of feel like there's at least an identity because of how good they were last year with this defense. It's the offense that's the bigger concern, because the identity was supposed to be, we're building this thing around Deshaun. We're gonna pass the ball a lot. Nick Chubb, who just came back to practice this week but isn't expected to play this weekend. I've kind of been talking to people about, like, even when he's back, what does this offense look like? Because they built it around Deshaun. They didn't build it to run the football with Nick Chubb 20 plus times. So I'm kind of skeptical of what that looks like. But and it's funny because when they have had success running the football, that's when their offenses seem to be like the most efficient. It keeps Deshaun ahead of the sticks. It keeps the offense ahead of the sticks. They're able to do some better things. But at this point, like, we're in the same boat as you, where we're kind of going into this week 5, and we're asking that exact question. Like, what is this team's identity at this point? Because the offense has just had so many issues, they don't have an answer for us.
I got bad news for you. Washington is 3rd in the league in rushing at 169 yards per game. So
that's not good.
Yeah,
not good for the Browns. At least it's good for you guys.
So Cleveland is coming in 1-3. Of course, Washington is really the talk of the league right now at 3-1 with Jaden Daniels and everything that he's doing. We're finally at that point, at least through 4 games, where we feel good about this team. But what do you sort of expect as you go in not feeling great about this team? And then, of course, Washington is feeling good, 2 road wins in a row, one on a Monday night where the offense is, I don't know if you've seen this stat. It's kind of all over there, but it's of course in Washington we see it. Jane Daniels has 19 incompletions and he has 23 scoring drives. Yeah. So he has more scoring drives than he does incompletions. What is the feeling for the team now, having to travel into Washington, where Washington is playing so well?
Yeah, it's funny because when the schedule came out and as we got closer to the season, I think all of us in Cleveland kind of looked at it and said, all right, this early portion is where the Browns can stack some wins. I think that included, like, the Cowboys game was always going to be tough. Jaguars was kind of, okay, that could be tough because Jacksonville was they were a good team last year that missed the playoffs because they sort of fell apart at the end of the season. We've sort of seen now that they're not a very good team this year. But then on top of that, like, if you could come out of that 1-1, then you have the Giants, the Raiders, and the Commanders in 3 in a row, and it's like, oh man, like, get 3 wins, you're 4-1. Like, that's a good feeling. Yeah. But because of the play of Jaden Daniels, like you mentioned, and just how good this Washington offense has been, I have a completely different outlook on this game than I did even like 3 weeks ago, I think. So yeah, I don't feel good about the prospects of going into Washington, having to play this team that's just playing so well right now, and Jaden Daniels is just lighting it up and having a terrific start to his career. There's an element of, like, I'm sure you guys probably understand this too. Like, I don't always trust Washington. So there's always like a chance they slip up a little bit and the Browns can kind of get one over on them. And there's also, like, the one thing I'll say, like, this Browns defense has the potential to be dominant, and the pass rush has the potential to, like, really disrupt things for Jaden if they can make his life difficult. Maybe that's like the great equalizer, like a Myles Garrett making some really good plays and pressuring him. Maybe that's the thing that makes makes it so that he can't just be as efficient as he's been. And then that keeps you in the game and gives you a chance. And the way that Deshaun played this past week, if they can sort of replicate that offensively, then I think they do have a chance to win most games that they're going to be playing in. So that's kind of the one saving grace that I fall back on. But yeah, like, this game has completely gone from being like that's a win for the Browns. Admittedly, right. I was saying that a couple weeks ago. And now I'm like, yeah, I'm not so sure about this. And the prospect of being 1-4 after 5 weeks is a scary one.
Well, we looked at it kind of the opposite in that we said, well, Cleveland, even though it's going to be at home, they were a darn good team last year, and maybe Chubb will be back and Myles Garrett. We chalked it up pretty much as a loss. Now we're looking at say, if we lose this game, we're going to be a little bit embarrassed, because we are on a roll and they're not. Sorry about that, Trev. I want to jump in.
No, you're good. How serious is Myles Garrett's Achilles injury? I saw he didn't practice today. Is that something to keep an eye on? Or
yeah, it's a good question, because this has kind of been a compounding issue.
Sorry, Stoner did it again.
Why I hit the howl again? I bet.
Yes.
Was it the same one? It was the howl again.
Yes,
Okay,
yes.
sorry about that.
I thought we were getting like a scary movie or something in the background. That's funny. No, so this has kind of been a compounding issue for Myles since week 1. He's been dealing with it. Started as like a foot injury, and he even like admittedly in press conferences has said like, yeah, my foot's bothering me, and it's something from my childhood. I had surgery on my feet and so whatever. And since then, it's kind of compounded into like before last week's game, he was on the injury report as foot, a thigh injury, and this Achilles issue. So because he's kind of overcompensating on it with his feet, it's kind of become other problems now as well. He's bound and determined, because that's just the type of player that Myles Garrett is, to play through it. But, and you guys will probably see this on Sunday, there will probably be stretches where he's off on the sideline, kind of attending to the injury. He misses some snaps. So that's a good thing for your guys' offense, in that there might be some opportunities for them to take advantage of Myles not being out there and make some plays. But yeah, it's something to keep an eye on. We haven't sort of, there hasn't been like this red flag, like it's going to end his season necessarily. But anytime you see Achilles, that's always an alarming thing. I mean, I know there's plenty of examples from the NBA where guys had like an Achilles issue and they played on it, and then it became a tear. And then so we've kind of asked a lot of those questions in the media, like, hey, how serious is this? Can he finish the season on it? And Myles' response is always he's just taking it kind of week to week.
The comment section has been awfully quiet. Normally they have a bunch of questions lined up, but we've been just so kind of, like I said, over our head with everything that's going on with Jaden Daniels and this offense. And we're kind of chalking it up to a win here. So hopefully we don't get too crazy. But Spencer, my last question for you is, give me a sort of prediction. I know it's still early in the week and we don't know injuries and all that, but give us your prediction on how you think this game is going to go, and give me a score too.
Oh man. So yeah, like I said, a couple weeks ago, I probably would have favored the Browns. I think because the way that they're playing right now, I'm going to say the Commanders win. I know I'm letting all the Browns community down, but I can't go 3 weeks in a row trying to pick this team because they're not playing very good football right now. And I'll hope I'm pleasantly surprised. We'll put it that way. But I'll say Commanders win 24-20. Browns will get to 20 points for the first time this season, but I think the Commanders hold on 24-20. That's fine. I slipped a positive in there for my Browns fans out there. They'll get to 20 points, but it's going to be a loss, unfortunately.
I think you're the first one of all these game previews that we've done that have actually picked Washington to win. Normally, you got to pick.
They're playing good football, man. They're playing good football.
That scares me, though. I don't like that. That scares me.
I'm reverse psychology.
Yeah.
Get it.
Word. I guess my last question is about Deshaun Watson again. Do you think lack of preseason play and his shoulder injury rehab situation is kind of hindering him in his poor offensive play, or like what is going on with Deshaun Watson?
I think there's probably something to that a little bit. It was hard because I understood at the time why they didn't play him in the preseason to an extent, because I mean they had some injuries they were still sort of sorting out on the offensive line, and if he were to get hurt, then like you're sitting there pointing the finger at Stefanski, asking like, what the hell are you doing? Putting this guy out there in meaningless games. So I understand why they didn't play him, but I do think at least for the first like week, you saw a guy who was clearly still kind of getting comfortable with things. I think week 2, there were some better things, but then week 3 kind of compounded some more. I do wonder, like, if they had taken more reps in the preseason, if they would have, again, back to the question you asked earlier, if they'd have an identity by now, or they'd feel like they did something at least remotely better than they have to this point. But yeah, it's interesting. I don't know that like solves everything with Deshaun and that he's just like coming out guns a-blazing if he plays in the preseason. But I do understand where like there's been questions about that because he didn't take any reps. And, you know, and it's funny because like around the league, there's just like different philosophies on this. I feel like every year we get more and more coaches who are like, I don't care to play my guys in the preseason. But then there's some teams who are like, I need the reps. I want to play. Yeah. So it's kind of a philosophical thing, like person to person. And I find that kind of interesting as well. But I don't know if I can take that solely away from this year. But I think I just kind of chalk it up to generally like not playing the preseason, come off the shoulder injury, hasn't played great football since 2020 when he was with the Texans. I think it's kind of an assortment of things that have led to him getting off to a slow start.
All right, Spencer, we appreciate you coming by here on Ref the District. Tell our viewers and our listeners where we can find your work and all that you do for the Browns.
Yeah, so I obviously host, as you guys mentioned earlier, I host the Dawg Check podcast here on the Believe Network. So you can find that as part of just their network of podcasts. I also cover the Browns for the Cleveland Browns on SI. Just if you type in Cleveland Browns SI or something along those lines, you'll find it. It's also, I guess, the official URL is like si.com/NFL/Browns. So you can find a bunch of my written work over there. I'm constantly, you know, out there at the team facility and pretty much, you know, I try to stay in the know on everything. So yeah, that's where you can find most of my work. And I'm also on X at Spencito. I still say Twitter. I don't know why I changed it to X here. It's still Twitter. I mean, Twitter. Come on.
Yes.
But you can find me on Twitter at Spencito with a little underscore on the end. I appreciate this though, guys. This was fun.
Yep, yeah, absolutely. Appreciate you coming by here on Ref the District, and we look forward to what happens on Sunday. Cleveland at Washington, 1:05 p.m. here in I always want to say FedEx. It's Northwest Stadium here in the southeastern part of the country. So figure that out.
I will be. I'm actually coming. I'm coming into town for the game to cover it. So
nice.
I've never been to that stadium, and I too learned when I searched how long of a drive I had.
Yeah.
That it has a new name now. I was like, I didn't know that either. So.
Yeah. and where are you staying? Do you know where you're staying?
So I have family in Springfield, Virginia. So I'm staying with them, and it's my uncle, and he actually has season tickets. So. He's driving to the game in the morning. I'm driving to the game in the morning. So
okay, nice. Well, if the game starts at 1 o'clock, leave probably about 8 a.m.
Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah, I know how traffic gets down there, so I'll do my best. But
it's crazy.
Awesome.
All right, Spencer. Appreciate you coming by, and may the best team win.
Yes, sir.
We'll see how it all shakes out. Best of luck to you guys.
All right,
thank you very much.
Yeah, see you guys. Thanks.